What I want to do today, it's going to be hard for me, I'm a loud speaker, is to speak about the power of place. I tried not to overthink this too much. I didn't want it to come across as a mini lecture. Lectures are what I do for a living, and I wanted it to be a more personal reflection and sharing of what causes me fear, but also what gives me hope. One of the things that gives me hope these days is that people's communities, place-based communities can make a difference. And I think they can make a difference in healing the planet that is in so much need of healing these days. But let me start with the fear part, and we'll get that out of the way right away. I've been concerned about environmental issues for a long time, but it's only in the last few years that I've really become aware of how grave the crisis really is. That humanity itself, in fact, is threatened, particularly if we continue down the path that we are on. And this causes a type of fear in me that I think only another parent might truly understand, because it's not a fear for myself, but it really is a fear for my children and the kind of world that they will live in as adults. We like to think that in the developed world, even if we don't admit it, that we're going to be fine. That our resources, our technology, our wealth will cushion the blow for us. And make no mistake about it, money is going to matter. I'm sure it will. But I also know that a tsunami, a storm surge, a superstorm, a drought that destroys a significant aspect of our food supply, that these catastrophes know no class prejudice, that it won't matter how much money you have, you won't easily be able to buy safe haven depending on if you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time, and those wrong places are going to be increasingly frequent and prevalent. So that's the fear part. The positive part is that I think I've found something that I can believe in, that I can be very proactively involved in, and something that gives me hope, and that's what I want to share today. Because so much of what we talk about when we talk about climate change is fear-related. It's about all the bad stuff that's going to happen. And I think we all need tools for how to respond to that fear in a constructive way. I think that the solution, part of the solution, there's not going to be any one single solution, of course, to this problem, but part of the solution is going to be rooted in communities and local places. Now, there may be skepticism out there. How can a few people, a small community, make a difference in a problem that is so massive and so global? If you're skeptical, it may be because your knowledge of localism or local action is informed by an earlier generation, perhaps. You all may have heard of or be familiar with the phrase, think globally, act locally. And in fact, I learned recently that that phrase possibly dates back to the turn of the 20th century, made popular by a Scottish architect and city planner in around 1915. But most of us are more familiar with that phrase from the 70s, the environmental activism of the 1970s. I would say that today's localization movement, if I can call it that, I think it's still finding its name or its brand, I suppose, if we want to use modern terminology, is similar and yet profoundly different in the sense that it is really suited to the problem of our time. I've come up with 5 key points, or 5 points I'd like to share about the localization movement, or what localization is, to try to give you something to think about before I talk a little bit more about what it means to me to be part of this movement. The first thing I think I'd like to say is that localization matters. It matters because communities of life are intertwined and interconnected. And if you think about that long enough, you realize that that means that communities have, the way communities behave have profound implications for regions, for nations, and in fact, for the entire globe. Because there are, global implications for how communities behave. So localization matters because we're intertwined and interconnected. Localization is also a specific and very logical response to the failure of our economic systems. An economy that is based solely on ever-increasing consumption and dependent on the continued extraction and harvest of limited natural resources is doomed. And what localizers are doing is rethinking and reconfiguring an economics that is sustainable, that does not depend on ever increasing growth. A third point I would make is that localization is a proactive response to the climate disruption that is already here. We can wait for crises to occur, or we can anticipate those crises and try to proactively meet them in a variety of ways. And that's what localization is about. That's what localization tries to do. A fourth point of localization is that it plans, sort of similar to the other one, for the coming downshift. It understands that our overdependence on fossil fuels has been a relatively short period in our history, and it's a period of history that is coming to a fairly rapid end in the whole scheme of human history. Finally, localization is a positive social trend that is premised, as I began by saying, on a commitment to place, a specific place. Some of you heard me read this quote before. It's a favorite quote of mine because, again, I know that we tend to talk more about fear than we do about hope and about love. And maybe in an academic community that's pretty typical because we want to all be so coldly realistic and based in a kind of hard truth and hard reality. But I believe that the truth is that fear is not the best motivator. That I think love has to be a motivator. And so the quote is from Richard Louv in his newest book, The Nature Principle, where he writes, "We cannot protect something we do not love, and we cannot love something we do not know." What this means to me is that focusing on place, something we know and love, is a no-brainer in terms of finding proactive solutions and motivating people to do the right thing, to address climate change before it is too late, frankly. Places, local places, are where put it another way, the rubber meets the road. It's where the work gets done. It's where change is made. It's where relationships are built. And I really believe that it's in communities, place-based communities, where we're going to find the courage and adopt the strategies that will allow us to pull back from the brink of climate collapse. The other thing about environmental choices that often gets mentioned is how it's all about sacrifice. We have to give up all these things, our luxuries and our cars and our convenience and our mobility and on and on. And I'm not naive. Of course we're going to have to change, and of course we're going to have to give some things up or do things differently. But I think the sacrifice piece is way overblown and overstated, and that's because our economic system, the marketers, the conventional economics, the advertisers, have a vested interest in wanting us to believe that less is less, that we need more all the time. But you've all heard the phrase, and it's becoming more popular, that less is more. And I would say that has profound sort of meaning in the localization movement, because research is being done to show that powering down can lead to a higher quality of life. Of course, it's going to depend on how you define quality of life, but if having less stuff to worry about, to work hard to pay for, to fix, is a good thing, then less is more. Having more free time and more face-to-face and human relationships, because you can't travel all the time, is possibly another version of less is more. So that's kind of a very broad overview, I know, of what the localization movement is, or what localization means. And it might seem very abstract at this point. So I want to just conclude with a sentence or two about how I'm living localization here in Fargo Moorhead, in this Red River Valley. What I've done essentially is I've connected a passion of mine, a passion for food, which I've always had, to the localization of the food system, which is part of a larger localization movement. We all know, I think, that industrial agriculture is a driver of climate change. It's a driver of declining health, and it needs to change. It does not serve anybody except big economic interests who are vested in the system. So I've been involved for the last year in the establishment of a startup cooperative called Prairie Roots Food Cooperative. My students outside have some literature on the table if you want to stop by and talk to them about it. But in essence, a cooperative does a lot of the things that the localization movement espouses. It reduces sort of the scale of food production to a face-to-face, localized system. It protects the environment. It protects human health. It's democratically controlled. And it's a viable economic alternative that puts people and places before profits. Thank you.